Some letters just feel heavy. You know the type. They aren't weighed down by paper, but by pure, condensed, bureaucratic malice. They have a certain stiffness, a self-importance that makes the air around them feel a little colder. And when one is taped to your front door on a perfect Saturday morning, it's not a letter. It's a declaration of war. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before the declaration of war, there was peace, a deep, soul-cleansing, suburban weekend kind of peace. I was in my backyard, a kingdom of moderately well-maintained grass and a slightly wobbly patio set, admiring my two proudest possessions, my kayaks. One was a screaming, look-at-me shade of yellow I'd dubbed nuclear banana. The other was a vibrant, almost offensively cheerful pink called radioactive flamingo. They were my escape pods. My ticket out of Cypress Creek Estates, a neighborhood so beige it might as well have been sponsored by a manufacturer of manila folders. I'd just finished hosing them down after a glorious morning paddle on the lake, a trip taken specifically to wash the taste of client revisions and HOA-approved color palettes out of my mouth. They were leaning against the side of the house, tucked neatly behind a row of azalea bushes I was unreasonably proud of. From the street, you'd have to be a private investigator with a periscope to even catch a glimpse of them. They were my secret, colorful rebellion. The coffee in my mug was perfect. A bird was chirping a melody that didn't sound at all judgmental. The distant drone of a lawnmower was the official soundtrack of Saturday morning tranquility. I was in my happy place, mentally charting a course down a lazy river for the following weekend. Life, for that brief, shining moment, was good. And then I saw it. I'd walked around to the front of the house to grab the morning paper from the driveway, and there it was. A single, crisp, white envelope, secured to the middle of my front door with an aggressive amount of packing tape. It wasn't in the mailbox where civilized mail goes to live. It had been placed there, by hand. A personal delivery of impending misery. My stomach did a slow, leaden roll. I already knew. The logo in the top left corner confirmed it, a smug-looking swan wearing a tiny, utterly unearned crown, the official seal of the Cypress Creek Estates Homeowners Association. I peeled the tape off, which took a significant portion of my door's paint with it, and unfolded the paper. My eyes scanned the sterile, laser-printed text. Official notice of violation. It had all the charm of a tax audit. Reference, Cypress Creek Covenants, Conditions and Restrictions, Section 8, Subsection 12B, Prohibition of Undesignated Watercraft Storage. Description of violation. On this date, at approximately 9:15 a.m., two brightly colored kayaks, hereafter referred to as the watercraft, were observed being stored improperly on the side of the property. The watercraft were visible from a potential line of sight from the community sidewalk, compromising the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood. Fine assessed, $150. Corrective action required. The watercraft must be removed from public view or stored in an approved location, i.e., inside a garage or an HOA-approved shed structure, within 48 hours of this notice. Failure to comply will result in additional fines of $50, $100 per day. Issued by Carol Weatherby, President, Cypress Creek Estates, HOA. I read it twice, my blood pressure climbing with each word. The watercraft? She made them sound like a pair of rogue destroyers that had illegally docked in my petunias. Potential line of sight? What kind of potential? If a hawk was flying overhead while carrying a small child with X-ray vision? If my neighbor Gary leaned out his second-story window with a pair of military-grade binoculars? Aesthetic harmony? This was coming from a woman whose idea of daring landscaping was alternating two different shades of mulch. The peace of my Saturday shattered into a million pieces. The bird now sounded like it was mocking me. The distant lawnmower sounded like a gathering storm. I crushed the letter in my fist, the sharp edges of the paper digging into my palm. My zen was gone, replaced by a simmering, righteous rage. Carol Weatherby had just picked a fight with the wrong graphic designer and his plastic boats. With the crumpled violation notice clutched in my hand like a holy relic of injustice, I marched. I didn't walk. I marched. Across my lawn, onto the pristine, crack-free sidewalk, and directly toward the beige fortress of solitude that was Carol Weatherby's house. Her home was the platonic ideal of the HOA handbook. The lawn was a perfect, uniform green carpet that looked like it was cut with surgical scissors. The bushes were tortured into perfect spheres. The house numbers were in the approved, soul-crushingly dull font. It was a monument to oppressive mediocrity. And there she was, the queen in her castle. Carol, in her late 60s, with a helmet of perfectly coiffed silver hair and a visor she wore even on cloudy days, was on her porch. She wasn't drinking coffee or reading a book. She was tending to a bonsai tree, using a pair of tweezers to pluck a single, offending leaf. The scene was so perfectly, villainously on the nose, it was almost comical. She saw me coming. A tiny, triumphant smile flickered at the corners of her mouth before being replaced by a mask of stern, civic duty. "Leo," she said, her voice a low hum that could curdle cream from 50 paces. "To what do I owe the pleasure? I trust you received your notice." "You know damn well I did, Carol," I said, stopping at the foot of her porch steps. I refused to give her the high ground, literally or figuratively. "You taped it to my door like a plague warning. $150? For kayaks that are completely hidden behind my prize-winning azaleas?" She snipped. Another microscopic leaf from her tiny tree, the snick of the clippers echoing in the silence. "Rules are rules, Leo, and your prize-winning azaleas have some rather patchy areas near the foundation. I was conducting my morning property integrity walk, as is my presidential duty, when I saw a flash of, well, I believe the official notice described it as nuclear banana." "So you were snooping." "I was ensuring community aesthetic harmony," she corrected, her voice dripping with condescension. "Imagine if everyone simply left their hobby equipment lying around for the world to see. It would be anarchy. First, it's kayaks. Then what? Rusty pickup trucks on blocks? Makeshift above-ground pools? A pen of feral hogs? Where does it end, Leo?" I stared at her, genuinely baffled by the leap from plastic boats to feral hogs. "It ends with me storing my property neatly on my own property. My garage is full, Carol. It's where I perform this wacky little activity called parking my car, and I am not building a shed just to hide my kayaks from your imaginary giraffe-necked sidewalk inspector." "The bylaws are quite clear," she said, setting her clippers down with infuriating precision. "You signed them when you purchased your home. Page 47, I believe. Perhaps you should take the time to reread them. You have 48 hours, Leo. The clock," she added, with a chilling hint of glee, "is ticking, and I would seriously consider a high-nitrogen fertilizer for those azaleas. They're looking a bit anemic from the south-facing angle." She turned her back to me, her attention fully devoted to her miniature tree. The conversation was over. Dismissed. I was a peasant sent away from the castle gates. I stood there for a moment, my fists clenched, my brain fizzing with a dozen scathing retorts that were now useless. Arguing with her was like trying to reason with a brick wall. a very smug, visor-wearing brick wall. She didn't want a solution. She wanted compliance. She thrived on this, on the petty tyranny of her little suburban fiefdom. I turned and walked back toward my house, the anger now solidifying into something colder and harder: determination. I looked at my two beautiful, vibrant Chaos Agent kayaks. Then I looked up at the vast, boring expanse of my beige roof. The bylaws said I couldn't store them on the side of the house where they were visible. The letter was very specific. It said nothing, absolutely nothing, about storing them on top of the house. A slow, wicked grin spread across my face. "Aesthetic harmony," I muttered to the empty street. "Oh, I'll give you some aesthetic harmony, Carol. You just wait." Back inside, the house felt too small. I paced my home office, a caged tiger fueled by indignation and overpriced coffee. This was my sanctuary, a room filled with my creative work: sleek logos, dynamic web pages, colorful branding packages. I solve problems for a living. I find elegant, eye-catching solutions to boring corporate needs. And this, I realized, wasn't just a fine. It was the ultimate design challenge. The client was a tyrant, the brief was nonsensical, and the budget was whatever it took to wipe that smug look off Carol Weatherby's face. I pulled up the Cypress Creek Estates CC&R document on my widescreen monitor. It was a 200-page PDF of pure, uncut misery. I scrolled through endless regulations on lawn gnomes: no more than 1, maximum height 12 inches, wind chimes, must not be audible from a neighboring property line, and the 27 approved shades of beige for exterior paint. It was a masterclass in crushing the human spirit. Then I found it. Section 15. Exterior Attachments. It was a dense block of text covering satellite dishes, solar panels, and antennas. I read it, and my pulse quickened. The theme was function. A satellite dish was permitted because it provided a service: television. Solar panels were encouraged because they provided a function: power. The rule was designed to prevent people from just bolting random junk to their houses. My eyes darted to the window, to the kayaks sitting innocently by the azaleas. So, I thought, my mind racing, they need a function. What was their function other than being vessels of joy and defiance? I glanced up at my roofline. It was a blank canvas of asphalt shingles, a boring, empty sky of suburban conformity. But with a little imagination, I grabbed the stylus from my design tablet. The client revision I was supposed to be working on could wait. This was more important. I started sketching. First, I drew the kayaks just lying flat on the roof. No, that looked sloppy. That was improperly stored, just in a higher location. Uninspired. I erased it and tried again. This time I drew them angled upwards, like giant, colorful fins on a '57 Chevy. Better. Much better. It had flair, it had attitude, but it wasn't enough. What if they weren't just on the roof? What if they were mounted? Purposefully. Intentionally. Pointing toward the heavens. Like boosters. The thought hit me with the force of a cartoon anvil. Rocket boosters. On my beige, vinyl-sided house rocket. The idea was so completely, utterly, magnificently stupid that I threw my head back and laughed. A loud, manic, cathartic laugh that probably had my neighbors checking their locks. This was it. This was the answer. It was petty. It was absurd. And it was, just maybe, technically compliant with the God-forsaken bylaws. They weren't improperly stored watercraft if they were a decorative architectural feature, were they? Or even better, a conceptual art installation. My fingers flew across the keyboard. Custom metal fabrication near me. Heavy-duty roof mounting brackets. Contractors who don't ask too many questions. The war wasn't going to be won with arguments or appeals. It was going to be won with steel, bolts, and a glorious, weaponized lack of taste. The next day was Sunday, day 2 of the 48-hour countdown to Armageddon, or at least to another $50 fine. My morning was a blur of phone calls, each one a deeper plunge into the abyss of contractor-induced despair. My brilliant idea was colliding with the hard, boring wall of reality, and reality was putting up a hell of a fight. The first call was to a high-end, 5-star rated roofing company. I could practically hear the guy on the other end of the line spit out his coffee. "You want to do what, now?" he asked, his voice a mixture of confusion and suspicion. "Mount 2 kayaks, to my roof, angled, like rocket boosters," I repeated, trying to sound as sane as possible. There was a long pause. "Sir, we install shingles. We repair leaks. We do not engage in nautical novelty installations. Are you one of Steve's friends? Is this a prank call?" I assured him it was not a prank, and he politely suggested I seek a different kind of professional. The second call was to a general contractor whose truck I'd seen around the neighborhood. He was more blunt. "Yeah, no," he grunted before I'd even finished my sentence. "My insurance guy would have a conniption. Mounting kayaks to a roof? That's a custom job, pal. A liability nightmare. Sounds like you're trying to tick off your HOA. I don't do domestic disputes. Good luck with that." He hung up. The third call, born of desperation, was to a guy from a Craigslist ad whose entire marketing pitch was any job, no job too weird. "Sure, I can do it," a gravelly voice rasped through the phone. $200, cash up front. No guarantees it'll stay up in a strong wind, or a light breeze, or if a large bird lands on it. You got cash?" I thanked him for his time, and hung up before he could offer to throw in a complimentary roof tarring. Dejected, I slumped in my office chair, the glorious vision of my house rocket fading. Maybe Carol had won. Maybe I was doomed to a life of storing my kayaks in a cramped garage, a constant plastic reminder of my defeat. I made one last half-hearted Google search, typing in custom creative installations. And there it was, a link to a website with a grainy, low-res logo. Manny and Sal's Miscellaneous Mounting and More. Their slogan sealed the deal. If you can dream it, we can probably bolt it to something. I clicked on their gallery. It was a digital museum of glorious absurdity. There was a photo of a giant fiberglass shark head, jaws agape, mounted above a pool house. There was a vintage motorcycle, gleaming chrome, bolted to a stone fireplace like a hunting trophy. There was a full suit of medieval armor, brandishing a halberd, installed in the middle of a suburban stairwell. These weren't contractors. These were artists. These were my guys. An hour later, a beat-up Ford Transit van that looked like it had survived a demolition derby rattled to a stop in my driveway. The side was painted with their logo, and a phone number with the added, hand-painted promise, "We also do gutters." 2 men hopped out, a study in contrasts. The first, Manny, was tall and wiry, with a long graying ponytail and the calm, thoughtful expression of a philosopher who'd spent years contemplating the load-bearing capacity of drywall. The second, Sal, was his polar opposite. He was short, built like a fire hydrant, with a shaved head, a booming laugh that seemed to precede him, and arms covered in a tapestry of colorful tattoos. "All right, Chief," Sal boomed, clapping his hands together. "Manny here said you had a weird one for us. We live for weird. Weird pays for the good beer. So what magnificent piece of junk are we mounting today?" I took a deep breath. "Those," I said, pointing a thumb toward the nuclear banana and the radioactive flamingo. "On that." I pointed up to the roof. Sal stared. His jaw hung open for a solid 5 seconds. Then, he exploded in a roar of laughter so loud it probably rattled the windows in Carol's house. "Manny, get over here! You gotta see this! This guy's a certified genius! He wants to turn his house into a spaceship!" Manny strolled over, unhurried. He didn't laugh. He just stroked his chin, his eyes scanning the angle of my roof, his expression utterly serious. Interesting," he mused. "Asymmetrical gable roof. We'll have to account for that in the mounting. What's the pitch we're looking for? Are we talking a 45-degree launch angle for low-orbit insertion, or more of a 60-degree atmospheric entry burn look?" I was floored. You're not going to tell me this is a terrible idea?" "Oh, it's a terrible idea," Manny said calmly, "from a conventional architectural standpoint. It serves no practical purpose and will likely depreciate your property value among boring people. But from a sticking-it-to-the-man standpoint, it's structurally sound poetry. We'll need custom-fabricated steel brackets, T-slotted for adjustability. We'll have to install load-bearing distribution plates in the attic to spread the force across at least 4 rafters for each mount. And the weather sealing around the bolts has to be immaculate. The challenge isn't getting them up there, Leo. The challenge is making sure they stay up there through a hurricane while looking undeniably awesome." "And you can do that?" I asked, a fresh wave of hope washing over me. Sal slapped me on the back with a hand the size of a cinder block, nearly sending me face first into my azaleas. "Buddy, we once mounted a life-size T-Rex head in a pediatric dentist's waiting room. A couple of plastic boats is a walk in the park. Now it ain't gonna be cheap. Custom fabrication takes time and steel costs a fortune these days. And," he added, holding up a finger, "it'll require a case of premium IPA, the good stuff, for creative lubrication." I explained the whole sordid story. The kayaks, the fine, the 48-hour deadline. Carol. Sal's grin grew wider with every detail. "An HOA dispute?" he roared. "You're fighting an HOA president named Carol? Oh, this is beautiful. This is a public service. Manny, we're giving this guy the spite discount." "There's no such thing as a spite discount," Manny said without looking up from his notepad, where he was already sketching designs. "Well, there is now," Sal declared. 15% off for services rendered in the glorious pursuit of petty revenge." I grinned, feeling the weight of the weekend lift off my shoulders. "You're hired," I said. It was the best decision I'd ever made. Monday morning arrived not with the usual soul-crushing dread, but with the high-octane promise of imminent chaos. At 8 a.m. sharp, the Manny and Sal Express, their battle-scarred van, rumbled back into my driveway. The 48-hour deadline was breathing down my neck, set to expire at sundown. The project was officially underway, and it quickly became the most exciting thing to happen on Willow Lane since a squirrel got into the transformer last summer. The sound was the first thing that alerted the neighborhood that this was not a standard roof repair. It began with the thunderous classic rock blasting from a paint-splattered boombox Sal placed on my lawn. Then came the high-pitched scream of a chop saw as Sal, wearing a welding mask and a sleeveless t-shirt that revealed tattoos of what appeared to be a squid wrestling a shark, began slicing through thick beams of raw American steel. Sparks showered across my driveway like a heavy metal fireworks display. Meanwhile, Manny was on the roof. He moved with the quiet, deliberate grace of a mountain goat, taking precise measurements, calling down coordinates and angles to Sal. He wasn't just eyeballing it. He was using lasers, levels, and a complex-looking protractor. He was treating the placement of 2 plastic kayaks with the gravitas of a NASA engineer planning a Mars landing. Their synergy was a bizarre and beautiful thing to witness. It was a chaotic ballet of meticulous planning and brute force. "Sal, I need a 14-inch bracket with a 50-degree offset," Manny would shout from the roof. "You got it, Professor," Sal would bellow back over the screech of the saw. "1 grade A, heavy-duty boat holder upper, coming right up." Naturally, the neighbors noticed. The curtain on Gary's window next door was twitching like a nervous eyelid. I saw him peek through the blinds, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated disapproval. He shook his head so vigorously I was worried he'd sprain something. I could almost hear him on the phone, his voice a panicked whisper as he reported me to every conceivable authority from the city council to the ASPCA. On the other side, my sweet, elderly neighbor Maria emerged onto her porch, drawn by the commotion. She watched for a few minutes, her head cocked in curiosity, before disappearing back inside. She returned a few minutes later with a tray carrying a pitcher of lemonade and a plate of still warm chocolate chip cookies. "Oh my, Leo," she said, her eyes wide with wonder as she took in the scene. "What are you boys building up there? Is it a new type of antenna to get better reception for my baking shows?" Sal vaulted over a hedge to meet her, grabbing 3 cookies in one go. "Even better, ma'am," he said through a mouthful of chocolate. "We are installing a long-range, high-speed, atmospheric joy delivery system. Top of the line." "How wonderful," Maria chirped, completely satisfied with this explanation. "You boys let me know if you need more cookies." Soon, others began to gather. A small crowd formed on the sidewalk across the street, whispering and pointing. A teenager on a skateboard, who I'd only ever seen scowl, stopped, pulled out his phone, and with a look of profound reverence began to live stream the entire operation. I later learned he'd captioned it, "My neighbor is a legend. #Kayak Rocket House." The climax of the build came mid-afternoon. The mounting. The custom brackets, now painted a sleek, menacing matte black, were a thing of beauty. They were ridiculously over-engineered, thick plates of steel that looked like they could support a small car, let alone a 50-pound piece of plastic. Manny and Sal worked in tandem, drilling through the shingles and decking, sinking long, thick lag bolts directly into the roof rafters they'd marked from inside the attic. Every bolt was sealed with a generous glob of industrial-grade, waterproof sealant. Then, it was time for the main event. Using a rope and pulley system that Sal had masterfully jury-rigged to a sturdy oak tree in my front yard, they began the ascent. The nuclear banana went first. Slowly, carefully, they hoisted it into the air. It was a surreal sight, a giant yellow kayak floating against the blue sky. Manny, on the roof, guided it into place, nudging it until it slid perfectly into the cradle of the waiting brackets. Sal, on the ground, tightened the final bolts with a massive wrench, grunting with satisfaction. "She's locked and loaded," he yelled. "Houston, the banana is in orbit." They repeated the process with the radioactive flamingo on the other side of the roof's peak, creating a perfect, glorious symmetry. The final result was breathtaking. It was magnificent. It was the stupidest, most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The two kayaks were angled perfectly skyward, poised as if ready to fire at any moment and blast my beige little house straight into the stratosphere. I stood on my lawn, hands on my hips, a goofy, triumphant grin plastered on my face. I breathed. It's perfect. Not yet, Manny said from the roof. He pulled a small box from his tool belt. Inside were two solar-powered, waterproof LED kits. With the nimble fingers of a bomb disposal expert, he ran the wires discreetly along the brackets and into the open cockpits of the kayaks. One final touch. What color for the engine glow? What are my options? I'm asked. We've got your standard red, a cool hyperdrive blue, or, he said, pausing for dramatic effect, afterburner orange. Is that even a question? I laughed. Orange. Definitely orange. They finished just as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that almost matched my roof. The 48-hour deadline was mere minutes away. I paid Manny and Sal, who tried to give me the spite discount, but I insisted they take the full amount. The joy they had brought me was priceless. As they packed up their van, Sal gave me a small remote control. For the light show, he said with a wink. Use it wisely, Rocket Man. They drove off, leaving me alone on the precipice of my victory, the fate of Cypress Creek Estate's aesthetic harmony resting on a single button in my hand. As dusk settled over Willow Lane, a hush fell. The construction noise was gone, replaced by the gentle chirp of crickets. The crowd of onlookers had dispersed, leaving only the lingering question hanging in the air. What now? I stood in my driveway, the small black remote feeling impossibly heavy in my palm. Across the street I could see Carol's silhouette in her picture window, a motionless sentinel of suburban order, watching, waiting. This moment was for her. I took a deep, theatrical breath, held it for a beat, and pressed the button. The effect was instantaneous and far more magnificent than I had dared to imagine. A warm, pulsating orange glow bloomed from within the cockpits of the kayaks. The LEDs weren't just on. They flickered and shifted, perfectly simulating the hot, unstable burn of rocket engines just before liftoff. The light washed over my roof, casting long, dramatic shadows across the lawn. My boring, beige house was suddenly transformed. It was no longer just a house. It was a vessel. A ridiculous, glorious, plastic-powered vessel on the launch pad, preparing for a low-orbit burn straight through the heart of conformity. The reaction from the neighborhood was immediate. "Whoa, dude! Sick!" The voice belonged to the skateboarder, who had returned to witness the grand finale. He had his phone out again, capturing the moment for his growing online audience. From her porch next door, Maria began to clap, a slow, steady applause. "Oh, Leo, it's like a spaceship from the cartoons. It's so festive." A minivan driving down the street slowed to a crawl, the driver's jaw visibly hanging open. He gave me a slow, emphatic thumbs up before continuing on his way. And then, the reaction I was waiting for. Across the street, the silhouette in the window vanished as Carol's curtain was yanked shut with a violence I could feel from 50 yards away. Mission accomplished. I stood there for a good 10 minutes, just soaking it in. I was no longer Leo, the graphic designer. I was Commander Leo of the starship Suburbia. I was a beacon of absurdity in a sea of beige. Eventually, the need for a celebratory beer drew me back to the house. As I reached my front door, I saw it. Another white envelope, taped to the wood with even more force than the first one. She must have been standing there, letter in hand, waiting for the exact moment the 48-hour deadline officially passed to slap it on my door. The sheer, obsessive pettiness was almost impressive. I tore it down, the tape taking another large chunk of paint with it. At this rate, I'd need to repaint the whole door, maybe in nuclear banana yellow. I unfolded the letter under the warm, orange glow of my newly installed roof boosters. Final notice of violation and escalated fine. Reference: CCNR Section 12, Subsection 4A. Prohibition of unapproved structural or architectural modifications, and Section 9, Subsection 3C. Regulations regarding exterior lighting. Description of violation. Two kayaks have been affixed to the roof of the property in a manner resembling rocket propulsion units, constituting a radical and unapproved modification to the structure. Furthermore, unapproved and aesthetically disruptive afterburner orange lighting has been installed. This modification is not in keeping with the community's established architectural theme of pleasant suburban oblivion. I paused. Okay, I definitely added that last part in my head, but it felt right. Fine assessed, $500. An additional fine of $100 per day will be levied until the unapproved modification and associated lighting are removed. Corrective action required. Immediate removal of the entire offending structure is demanded. Failure to initiate removal within 24 hours will result in further HOA action. By Carol Weatherby, President, Cypress Creek Estates, HOA. The signature was a furious, jagged slash of ink that had been pressed so hard it had nearly torn through the paper. I read the letter, and a strange sense of calm washed over me. The anger was gone, replaced by a feeling of pure, unadulterated victory. This wasn't a fine, it was a rave review. It was confirmation that my message had been received. I hadn't just broken her rules. I had shattered them, set them on fire, and launched the ashes into a conceptual orbit. I walked to the back patio, the crumpled letter in my hand. I stuffed it into the base of my charcoal grill, doused it with lighter fluid, and struck a match. As the official notice of my transgressions went up in a satisfying whoosh of flame, providing the perfect starter for my celebratory steak dinner, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the end. The war had just begun. Tuesday morning dawned bright and early, bringing with it the certain knowledge that I was now officially hemorrhaging money at a rate of $100 per day for the crime of being awesome. I was sipping my coffee and admiring the way the morning sun glinted off the radioactive flamingo when I saw them. A two-person delegation from the Ministry of Misery. Carol was standing on the sidewalk in front of my house, clipboard in hand, looking like a furious general surveying a battlefield she had every intention of salting. Next to her stood a man I vaguely recognized from previous, less eventful HOA meetings. This was Harold, the board's treasurer, and, from what I could tell, Carol's chief sycophant. He was a small, meek man in a polo shirt tucked tightly into khaki shorts, and he looked profoundly uncomfortable, as if the sheer audacity of my roof was giving him a sympathetic rash. Carol was in full evidence-gathering mode. She was taking pictures with her phone from every conceivable angle. The front, the side, from across the street, from halfway down the block. I'm pretty sure if she could have chartered a helicopter for an aerial shot, she would have. Harold just stood there, shifting his weight from one boat-shoed foot to the other, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else on Earth. I decided to face the music. I opened my front door, my favorite coffee mug, a gift that read, I'm silently correcting your grammar in hand. Morning, Carol. Harold, I said cheerfully. Doing a photo shoot for the community newsletter? I can strike a pose if you want. Maybe one with me pointing heroically toward the sky? Carol didn't even grant me a glance. Her eyes were still locked on my roof, her lips pursed into a thin, white line of rage. This is not a joke, Leo, she snapped, her voice tight. This is a serious, flagrant violation. You have turned your home, a key component of our community's property value, into a carnival attraction. I prefer postmodern architectural statement, I countered, taking a sip of coffee. It's an art installation protesting the crushing conformity of suburban life, a commentary on the Sisyphean struggle for upward mobility. I'm thinking of calling it Beige Ascension. From behind Carol, Harold muttered something that sounded suspiciously like, she wants to fine you for the name, too. Silence, Harold, Carol commanded, finally turning her icy glare on me. Let me be perfectly clear, Leo. You have 24 hours to begin the removal of this monstrosity. If I don't see a contractor in your driveway by tomorrow morning, the HOA will be forced to hire one for you. We will have the structure removed, and we will place a lien on your property for the full cost of the removal and all outstanding fines. A lien. The word hung in the air, heavy and serious. This was a significant escalation. A lien, I said, my cheerful demeanor faltering slightly. Isn't that a little extreme, Carol? We're talking about a couple of kayaks, not a meth lab. The bylaws are crystal clear on the board's authority to rectify violations, she said, her voice filled with cold triumph. And frankly, this is more offensive to the eyes than a meth lab. At least that would be discreetly hidden in the basement. With that parting shot, she turned on her heel and marched off down the sidewalk, Harold scurrying to keep up. The threat was real. This had moved beyond funny notices and into territory that could cause actual, serious problems for me. I needed backup. I needed a professional. I went inside and called the one person I knew who navigated bureaucratic warfare for a living. My older sister, Chloe. Chloe was a paralegal at a downtown law firm, and her entire life was a testament to the power of organization, sharp wit, and understanding the fine print. She arrived that evening, pulling up in her sensible sedan. She got out, took one long look at my house with the kayak boosters glowing softly in the twilight, and just started laughing. A real, deep, genuine laugh. Leo, you are such a magnificent idiot, she said, shaking her head as she walked up the driveway. I love it. This is the most majestically petty thing I have ever seen in my entire life. She's threatening a lien, Chloe, I said, the gravity of the situation returning. Her laughter stopped, and her expression immediately sharpened. The fun-loving sister was gone, replaced by Chloe the paralegal. Okay, that's a power move. She's trying to scare you into folding. Let's go inside. Show me the bylaws you signed and every violation notice she sent you. Every single one. We spread the documents out on my dining room table, a depressing collage of bureaucratic nonsense. Chloe went through them with a highlighter and a red pen, her focus absolute. She muttered legal terms under her breath, her mind clearly firing on all cylinders. After an hour of intense concentration, she leaned back, a slow, predatory grin spreading across her face. Okay, she said. Here's the play. She's hitting you with the unapproved structural modification clause. It's her big gun. We argue that it's not structural in any load-bearing sense. It's decorative. It's an appendage, like a weather vane or an unusually aggressive lawn flamingo. It's no more structural than a Christmas wreath. I like that, I said. I'm just getting started, she continued. Second, and more importantly, she can't just slap a lien on your house because she feels like it. There's a process. It involves a series of official, certified mail warnings, a formal hearing, and then a vote by the full HOA board. So who's on the board? That's the thing, I said. It's Carol, the president. The spineless wonder herald is the treasurer. And, I paused, Maria from next door is the secretary. Chloe's eyes lit up. Maria? The sweet old lady? The one who bakes you cookies? The one and only. Chloe leaned forward, her grin turning positively wicked. Oh, this is good. This is very, very good, Leo. Carol thinks she's a queen ruling by decree, but she's forgotten that she's part of a triumvirate. It's a 3-person board. She and Harold are a 2-vote bloc, but a bloc can be broken. We don't need to win a legal war. We just need to win a political one. We need to win over Maria. Suddenly, the path forward was clear. The objective wasn't to fight Carol, head on. It was to launch a charm offensive aimed directly at the heart of the HOA itself. The sweet old lady next door. The next morning, Wednesday, I woke up to the distinct and unwelcome sight of flashing red and blue lights painting my living room walls. I peeked through the blinds, and sure enough, a Cypress Creek Police Department cruiser was parked at the curb, its presence on our quiet street as subtle as a monster truck rally. Someone, and I had a pretty good idea who that someone was, had officially called in the cavalry. This was Carol's nuclear option. When her own authority failed, she appealed to a higher one, hoping they'd be able to do what her angry letters couldn't. A small crowd of my neighbors was already starting to gather, drawn by the universal suburban signal for something interesting is finally happening. This was getting serious. 2 officers got out of the car. The first, whose name tag read Miller, was older, with a thick mustache and a weary expression that suggested he'd seen every form of human foolishness and was profoundly unimpressed by all of them. The second, Officer Davis, was younger, taller, and had a glint in his eye that told me he was trying very, very hard not to laugh. I decided the best defense was a good, non-threatening offense. I walked outside, feigning a casual morning of watering my now impeccably fertilized azaleas. Officer Miller approached, his hand resting on his belt. He sighed, a deep, world-weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 pointless domestic dispute calls. "Morning, sir," he said. "Are you the owner of this, residence?" He gestured vaguely at my house, as if he didn't quite have the words for what he was looking at. "That I am," I said, giving the officers a friendly nod. "Leo Maxwell. Is there a problem, officers?" "We received a call about a public nuisance and a possible unpermitted structure," Officer Miller said, his tone flat. Officer Davis cleared his throat, trying to cover a smirk. "The dispatcher said, and I believe I'm quoting this verbatim, a suburban home is attempting an unauthorized atmospheric launch." I couldn't help but smile. "Ah, well, I can assure you we have no immediate plans for liftoff. It's an art installation." I decided to stick to the script Chloe and I had rehearsed. The lights are solar-powered, so no wiring issues. The whole thing was professionally mounted and secured directly to the roof rafters, so it's not going anywhere. As far as I'm aware, it's not violating any city building codes. Is there a new ordinance against being awesome that I missed? Officer Miller pinched the bridge of his nose. His eyes closed. He looked like a man who was desperately wishing he'd called in sick. "Son, listen. We get these calls all the time. This is an HOA dispute. That's a civil matter. It has absolutely nothing to do with law enforcement unless that thing," he pointed a thumb at the nuclear banana, "falls. off and hits someone. Is it going to fall off? Absolutely not, I said with confidence. It's rated to withstand a Category 3 hurricane. I have the structural assessment and signed paperwork from the contractors right inside if you'd like to see it. Miller looked at Davis. See? He's got paperwork, he said, as if this settled the matter. He turned back to me, sir. Look, we're obligated to respond when we get a call. We've responded. We've seen it. It's definitely a thing. But it's not a police matter. Our official recommendation is that you try to resolve this with your HOA before someone gets creative and calls the FAA. Or the Space Force, Davis chimed in, finally letting a grin break free. Right, Miller grunted. Have a good day, Mr. Maxwell. They turned and walked back to their cruiser. As they got in, I saw Officer Davis pull out his personal phone and quickly snap a picture of my house. Carol, who I could now see watching from her window like a malevolent garden gnome, must have been absolutely apoplectic. Her ultimate weapon, calling in the authorities, had just been declared a dud. This small public victory felt huge. It wasn't just my fight anymore. The whole neighborhood was watching. By Thursday, the story of the Kayak rocket house had escaped the confines of Willow Lane. The teenager's live stream had been shared, screen-capped, and eventually picked up by a local weird news blog. From there, it jumped to a more legitimate city news website. By Thursday afternoon, the inevitable happened. A news van from a major local TV station, Channel 8, was parked on my street, its massive satellite antenna pointed at the sky like a sibling to my own roof-mounted array. The media circus had officially come to town. A reporter who seemed almost chemically perky, with impossibly white teeth and hair that defied the afternoon humidity, stepped out of the van. A cameraman followed, hoisting a large camera onto his shoulder. She marched up my driveway with the confidence of someone who gets paid to stick a microphone in people's faces. "Hi, Brenda Vale, Channel 8 News," she announced. "Are you the owner of the, rocket house?" Before I knew it, I was giving an on-camera interview in my front yard. Thankfully, Chloe had anticipated this. "If the media shows up," she'd instructed me, "you are not a disgruntled homeowner. You are an artist. You are a free spirit. You are making a statement." So I leaned into it. I talked about disrupting the monotony of the suburban landscape and using found objects to create a dialogue about aspiration and conformity. I sounded like the description card next to a confusing sculpture in a modern art museum. I think I even used the phrase juxtaposition of recreational freedom against residential rigidity. It was nonsense, but it was glorious, ratings-friendly nonsense. Brenda Vale ate it up. Then, like a shark smelling blood in the water, she headed directly across the street to Carol's house. This, I knew, was going to be good. Carol, never one to shy away from a platform, made a critical error. She agreed to an interview. The moment the camera was on her, she launched into a furious tirade. She waved her clipboard. She talked about bylaws, property values, aesthetic harmony, and the sanctity of the CCNRs. She came across less like a concerned community leader and more like a shrill, power-mad tyrant on the verge of a complete meltdown. The cameraman even had to take a step back. Her best soundbite, which the station would later use in every single promo, was when she pointed a trembling finger at my house and screeched, That renegade and his aerial abominations are a blight on this community." Brenda's next stop was Maria's. My wonderful cookie-baking neighbor came out onto her porch holding a fresh plate of snickerdoodles, which she immediately offered to the news crew. "Oh, the rockets?" she beamed when Brenda asked her about the controversy. "I think they're just lovely. They add a bit of whimsy to the neighborhood, don't you think? It's nice to see some color. And Leo is such a nice young man. He always carries my groceries in from the car for me." She was the perfect, unimpeachable character witness. The final interview, the cherry on top of this media Sunday, was with Manny and Sal. In an act of divine providence, they had been driving through the area and, upon seeing the news van, decided to stop by to inspect their work and bask in the glory. They were television naturals. Sal, in particular, was a star. He flexed his bicep for the camera and launched into a heartfelt monologue. "Here at Manny and Sal's Miscellaneous Mounting and More," he declared, his voice booming with passion. "We believe a man's home is his castle. And if that castle needs rocket boosters, well, we're the guys you call. We're not just contractors, we're dream enablers. We make the impossible possible, provided it can be securely bolted to a load-bearing surface." The story aired on the 6 o'clock news. It was everything I could have hoped for. Framed as a classic David versus Goliath story, it portrayed me as a quirky, creative guy just trying to live his life, and Carol as the unhinged HOA president from hell. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. The news station's Facebook page exploded with comments. "Go Leo! Down with the HOA Karens! That guy is a legend." A Facebook group called "I Support the Cypress Creek Kayak Rocket House" was created, and within hours it had over 2,000 members. Someone designed t-shirts. My house had become a destination. All evening, a slow but steady stream of cars drove down my street, the occupants pointing, taking pictures, and occasionally honking their horns and giving me a thumbs up. Someone even left a plastic NASA astronaut helmet on my doorstep with a note that said, "For the commander, Godspeed." I was no longer just a guy with kayaks on his roof. I had become a local folk hero, a symbol of the fight against petty tyranny. Carol, on the other hand, had become a meme. Someone had already photoshopped her furious, screaming face onto the body of Emperor Palpatine from Star Wars with the caption, "Execute Order 66 on all unapproved watercraft." The fallout was officially out of my hands. The story had taken on a life of its own. By Friday night, the pressure had become too much for Carol to ignore. The constant stream of traffic down our once quiet street, the endless calls to the HOA answering machine, mostly from people voicing their support for me, and the segment on the news replaying on a loop had forced her hand. She called an emergency meeting of the Cypress Creek Estates HOA. The stated purpose, to vote on the motion to forcibly remove my aerial abominations and place a lien on my property. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a sterile, multi-purpose room that usually smelled faintly of stale coffee and regret. But tonight, it was electric. The room was packed to the gills. It wasn't just the handful of residents who usually showed up to complain about parking. It was half the neighborhood, a handful of supporters from the Facebook group, and to Carol's visible horror, Brenda Vale and her cameraman from Channel 8, who had set up in the back of the room. It wasn't an HOA meeting. It was a media event. I sat at a long folding table at the front of the room. Chloe was by my side, looking sharp and confident in a black blazer, a stack of papers neatly arranged in front of her. She was in full legal eagle mode. On the other side of the table sat Carol, her face a thunderous mask of fury. Next to her, a pale and sweating Harold looked like he was about to be physically ill. And in the middle, holding the crucial swing vote, was Maria. She looked a little overwhelmed by the crowd, but she gave me a small, reassuring wink when Carol wasn't looking. Carol banged a small, ridiculously inadequate gavel on the table. "This emergency meeting of the Cypress Creek Estates HOA Board is now in session," she announced, her voice strained. "We are here to address the flagrant, ongoing, and highly publicized violation at 124 Willow Lane. Mr. Leo Maxwell has installed an unapproved, unsightly, and frankly dangerous structure on his roof, in direct defiance of multiple notices." Chloe leaned into her microphone. "Objection," she said, her voice calm but firm, cutting through Carol's tirade. The crowd murmured. "My client's art installation is neither unsightly, as taste is subjective, and public opinion seems to be overwhelmingly in its favor, nor is it dangerous, as certified by the licensed and insured contractors who installed it. We have their signed structural assessment right here, which states the mounting can withstand winds up to 120 miles per hour. She slid a document across the table toward Carol with a polished flick of her wrist. Carol shoved it aside without looking at it. "It is. In violation of Section 12. It is an unapproved structural modification," she insisted, her voice rising. "An interesting point," Chloe countered smoothly. "Is a large plastic Santa Claus climbing a ladder considered a structural modification, Carol? Because I have photographs from last Christmas of a 10-foot inflatable reindeer on your own roof, which, I might add, was tied down with what appears to be common twine." The room erupted in a wave of snickers and quiet laughter. Harold sank lower in his chair. "Per the bylaws," Chloe continued, pressing her advantage, "holiday decorations are permitted for a period of up to 6 weeks. My client, therefore, hereby officially declares his kayak installation to be a long-term holiday decoration celebrating the season of spite." This time, the laughter was loud and open. Carol's face turned a shade of mottled purple I had previously only seen on expired plums. "This is not a holiday! This is an eyesore!" she shrieked, banging the gavel again. I decided it was my turn. I stood up and faced the room, then turned my attention to Carol. "You know, Carol, this was never really about the kayaks," I said, my voice steady. "This was about a $150 fine for something you had to trespass on my property to even see. It was about you walking around with your clipboard, looking for any excuse to exert power, any tiny infraction to justify your own existence by making life a little bit harder for everyone else around you. You talk about community standards, but what about the standard of being a good neighbor? You didn't knock on my door and have a conversation. You slapped a fine on my door and declared war over a piece of plastic." My words hung in the air, and I saw nods of agreement throughout the crowd. Then another resident stood up. "She's right. She fined me because my garbage can was still at the curb at 7 p.m. She sent me a letter about my daughter's chalk drawings on the sidewalk," another voice called out. Suddenly the dam broke. A dozen long-suppressed grievances against Carol's reign of terror filled the room. The meeting had turned into a referendum on her presidency. She had lost control completely. Seeing the mutiny unfolding, she made a desperate move. "Fine," she yelled over the noise. "Fine, we will vote. The motion on the table is to authorize the board to hire a contractor to forcibly remove the structure at 124 Willow Lane and to place a lien on the property for all associated costs and fines. All in favor of the motion, raise your hand." Carol's hand shot into the air. She turned and glared at Harold with the intensity of a basilisk. After a moment of terrified hesitation, Harold's trembling hand slowly rose. 2 votes for, 1 vote against, would kill the motion. The entire room fell silent. Every single person turned to look at the sweet, unassuming old lady sitting in the middle of the table. It all came down to Maria. The silence in the clubhouse was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the industrial-grade carpet. Every eye was on Maria. Carol stared at her, her expression a mixture of command and desperation, trying to intimidate her into submission. I tried to send a wave of supportive, positive energy her way, giving her a small, encouraging nod. Maria looked at Carol, then at me, then at the expectant faces in the crowd. She took a slow, deliberate sip of water. "Maria? The vote?" Carol prompted, her voice tight as a guitar string. Maria set her glass down and leaned into the microphone. A small, sweet smile played on her lips. "Well, Carol," she began, her voice surprisingly firm and clear, "I've been doing a lot of thinking about this, and a lot of reading." She reached into her large handbag and pulled out her own copy of the Cypress Creek Estates CC&Rs. It was not a pristine document. It was worn, dog-eared, and bristling with dozens of colorful sticky notes. The woman had done her homework. "I have a lot of time for reading these days," she continued, putting on a pair of reading glasses she'd had hanging from a chain around her neck. "You keep citing Section 12, Structural Modifications. It's a very stern section, but I found myself drawn to a different one. Section 15, Antennas and Satellite Dishes. It's a bit of an old rule, written before everyone had cable, I suppose." She flipped through the pages with a practiced hand. "Here we are, subsection B. It says, and I quote, 'Any device intended for the reception or transmission of signals is permissible if mounted securely to the roof and does not impede the sight lines of neighboring properties.'" Carol scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "What on earth does that have to do with anything? Maria, those are boats." Maria looked up from the book, her eyes twinkling. She turned to me. "Leo, dear," she said, her voice full of innocent curiosity. "When I brought you those cookies the other day, what did you tell me you were building?" A huge, slow-motion grin spread across my face. Chloe was already trying to hide her face in her hands to conceal her laughter. I leaned into my own microphone. "Oh, well, Maria, since you asked," I said, playing my part in this beautiful, absurd piece of theater. "That's my new deep space communication array. It's a personal project, a hobby. I'm using it to listen for extraterrestrial signals, for science." The room was stunned into a new, deeper silence. The nuclear banana is calibrated to receive signals from the Alpha Centauri system, and the radioactive flamingo is pointed directly at Kepler 186f. I'm hoping to be the first person to make contact. The silence held for another beat, and then the room didn't just laugh. It exploded. It was a roar of pure, cathartic joy. Brenda Vale's cameraman was shaking so hard the shot was probably unusable. Maria smiled sweetly at a dumbfounded Carol. "So, you see, Carol," she concluded, her voice rising above the din, "they aren't improperly stored watercraft. And they aren't an unapproved structural modification. According to Leo, they are a signal reception device. And per Section 15, subsection B of our own bylaws, they are perfectly legal." "That is the most ridiculous, insane, preposterous thing I have ever heard in my life," Carol sputtered, her face completely drained of color. "Is it?" Maria asked gently. "The bylaws don't specify what kind of signals, do they? So, on the motion to remove the structure and place a lien on the property, I vote nay." She looked Carol dead in the eye. "The motion fails, 2-1. For a moment, Carol just sat there, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Then, with a final, defeated shriek of rage, she slammed the gavel down on the table, declared the meeting adjourned, and stormed out of the room. The crowd erupted in a standing ovation. People were cheering, whistling, and slapping me on the back. Manny and Sal seemed to appear out of nowhere, and before I knew what was happening, they had lifted me onto their shoulders, parading me around the room like a triumphant gladiator. We had done it. We had fought the law, or at least the bylaws, and we had won. In the weeks that followed the great HOA showdown, a new and frankly much better version of normal settled over Cypress Creek estates. The changes were palpable. The most significant change, of course, was the conspicuous absence of Carol Weatherby. Utterly humiliated and stripped of her power, she put her house on the market less than a week after the meeting. It sold with shocking speed. The rumor, passed in hushed and delighted tones over garden fences, was that she had moved to a gated retirement community in Florida, one with an even stricter, more draconian HOA. We all liked to imagine her there, no longer the queen but just another subject, being fined for having a non-regulation welcome mat. Her reign of terror was officially over. With a power vacuum to fill, the neighborhood unanimously elected a new HOA president at the next official meeting. In a landslide victory, Maria accepted the position. Her first official act was not to issue a fine, but to declare a 3-month moratorium on all violation notices, to give everyone a chance to just relax. Her second act was to use the HOA's Community Events Fund to organize a massive neighborhood block party. Aesthetic harmony was out. Actual harmony was in. My house, of course, became something of a local landmark. The Cypress Creek Kayak Rocket House was now a legitimate point of interest on Google Maps, with a 5-star rating and glowing reviews. The stream of curious onlookers slowed from a river to a trickle, but even weeks later, I'd still occasionally see a car slow down and someone snap a picture. The t-shirts Sal had printed up, featuring a cartoon of my house and the words, "Fight for your right to store things improperly," had sold out online. As for me, the whole ordeal had changed things. I was no longer the quiet guy in number 124. I knew more of my neighbors than ever before. I even got Gary from next door to crack a smile and admit, in a low grumble, that the Rockets were less offensive than the Hendersons' wind chimes. I'd become good friends with Manny and Sal. Our shared victory had forged a bond, and we actually started taking the kayaks out on the lake together on weekends. And Chloe, my hero of a sister, introduced me to a friend of hers from the law firm. She was smart, funny, and found the story of my architectural rebellion both legally appalling and personally hilarious. We had a date scheduled for Friday. And the kayaks? They stayed right where they were, proudly mounted on my roof, their orange lights glowing softly every evening at dusk. On the night of the block party, I stood in my backyard, flipping burgers on the grill. The air was filled with the sounds of laughter, music from Sal's ridiculously oversized sound system, and the happy chatter of neighbors who were actually talking to each other. Maria was showing off her prize-winning roses to a small, adoring crowd. My house stood sentinel over the whole scene. The two kayaks pointed toward the stars. It had started as a petty, angry response to a $150 fine. A stupid idea born of pure spite. But it had become something more. It had brought a neighborhood together. It was a monument to the idea that sometimes the most ridiculous solution is the best one. It was a permanent, plastic, brightly colored reminder that you should never underestimate a man's right to fight for his right to be a little weird. I looked up at the nuclear banana and the radioactive flamingo. my sentinels of absurdity against the twilight sky. I took a sip of my beer and smiled. I was finally home.